The rain turned the refugee camp into a churning sea of mud, and Nathaniel Edwards stood at the edge of it with his stomach in knots, wondering how many of the people huddled under those sagging canvas tarps would survive another week. The war between the Kingdom of Aldermore and the Ironjaw clan had ended 3 months ago, but the aftermath stretched on like an open wound that refused to heal. And nowhere was that more evident than in the masses of displaced orcs who had nowhere left to go. Nathaniel had volunteered with the relief effort because it seemed like the right thing to do after spending 6 years fighting in that very war. He had killed orcs, watched his friends die at their hands, and carried scars both visible and hidden from those brutal years. But he had also seen enough death to know that continuing to hate an entire people would only perpetuate the cycle. And at 32, he was tired of fighting. The kingdom had established this camp near the frontier town of Millbrook, where Nathaniel had grown up on his family's farm, and he spent his days distributing food, helping repair shelters, and trying to ignore the suspicious looks from both the human townspeople and the orc refugees who did not trust his intentions. The girl caught his attention because she sat apart from the others, always alone near the eastern edge of the camp, where a small creek provided slightly cleaner water than the muddy center. She looked young, maybe 19 or 20, with the characteristic green skin and small tusks of her people, but she was thinner than most orcs he had seen, her shoulders hunched in a way that suggested she was trying to make herself smaller. Her dark hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and she wore clothes that had been patched so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. What struck him most was how she flinched whenever anyone came near, orc or human, and how her amber eyes constantly scanned the area as though expecting an attack. He had tried to approach her twice with food and blankets, but she had fled both times before he could speak more than a greeting. Other volunteers told him she had arrived at the camp alone 6 weeks ago, gave her name as Grishna to the registrar, and had barely spoken to anyone since. The camp administrator, a weary woman named Helen, mentioned that Grishna took her rations and disappeared, never joining the communal meals or the evening gatherings where the refugees tried to maintain some semblance of community. "Some of them are too broken by what they went through," Helen had said, shaking her head. "The war did terrible things on both sides. She might have lost everyone." The third time Nathaniel approached Grishna, he brought a small piece of honeycomb wrapped in waxed cloth. His family's farm had beehives, and honey was one of the few luxuries he could offer. He walked slowly, making sure she could see him coming, and stopped a good 10 feet away from where she sat on a fallen log near the creek. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and the light caught the green tones of her skin, making her look almost ethereal. "I'm not here to bother you," he said, keeping his voice gentle and his hands visible. "I just thought you might like this. It's honey from my family's bees. You don't have to talk to me or anything. I'll just leave it here if you want." She stared at him with those wary amber eyes, and he could see her calculating whether he posed a threat. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and he noticed how they trembled slightly. He set the honeycomb on a rock between them, took 3 steps back, and then sat down on the ground to show he was not going to rush her. They stayed like that in silence for several minutes, and he began to think she would wait him out until he left, but then she spoke in a voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Why what?" he asked, not wanting to assume her question. "Why do you keep trying to give me things?" Her accent was thick, the orcish inflection making the words sound harsher than she probably intended. "I have my rations. I am not starving." Nathaniel considered that. "I guess because you look like you could use something sweet. War's bitter enough without having to taste it in everything." She frowned, her small tusks catching the light. You were a soldier. It was not a question, and he did not bother denying it. 6 years, infantry, I mustered out when the treaty was signed. You killed my people. Still not a question, just a flat statement of fact. Yes. And your people killed mine. That's what war is. He met her eyes steadily. But the war's over now, and I'm trying to figure out how to live with what I did. Helping here seems like a start. Grishna looked away, her gaze following the creek's flow. Guilt, then. You think feeding us makes up for the blood? No, Nathaniel said quietly. Nothing makes up for it. But sitting around drowning in guilt doesn't help anyone either, so I do what I can. She was silent for a long moment, then reached out and took the honeycomb from the rock. Her fingers were long and calloused, marked with old scars. She unwrapped it carefully, almost reverently, and broke off a tiny piece. When she tasted it, her eyes widened slightly, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of pleasure that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I have not tasted honey since I was a child, she said softly. My mother used to trade furs for it in the borderlands. Used to, Nathaniel asked gently. She is dead. They are all dead. Grishna rewrapped the honeycomb with the same careful precision. Thank you for this, it is kind. She stood then, clearly ending the conversation, and walked away toward her shelter before he could respond. But it was progress, and Nathaniel found himself smiling as he headed back to the distribution center. Over the following weeks, he made a point of stopping by the creek each afternoon, always bringing something small, dried fruit, fresh bread from the baker who sympathized with the relief effort, wildflowers when the spring finally broke through. Grishna never said much, but she stopped fleeing when she saw him coming, and sometimes she would sit on her log while he sat on the ground nearby, and they would share the silence. It was on one of these quiet afternoons that he finally asked her about her dreams. The question came from nowhere, really, just a thought that slipped out. What do you dream about? He had expected her to ignore him or give some dismissive answer, but instead she went very still. The late afternoon light painted the camp in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, children were laughing as they played in the creek. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. A place where I feel safe. The words hit him harder than he expected, settling into his chest with a weight he could feel. He looked at her profile, at the way she held herself so carefully controlled, and realized that everything about her, the isolation, the wariness, the trembling hands, spoke of someone who had not felt safe in a very long time, maybe ever. Tell me about it, he said. This place you dream of. Grishna glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face as though no one had ever asked her to elaborate on anything. She pulled her braid over her shoulder, fingers working at the end of it nervously. It is quiet. There are no soldiers, no fighting. No one looks at me like I am a monster. There is a small house with walls that keep out the cold and a door that locks. There is food enough that I do not go to sleep hungry, and there are animals, chickens, maybe a goat, things that depend on me but do not hurt me. That sounds like a good dream, Nathaniel said. Simple, but good. It is foolish, she said, her voice hardening. There is no such place for someone like me. The clans would kill me if I returned. I left during the war when I refused to fight anymore, and humans do not want orcs living among them. So I stay here in this camp and wait for them to decide what to do with us. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He had heard the town council debates about the camp, the angry voices calling for the orcs to be driven out, sent back to their territories, even though many of those territories were now destroyed. He had argued for compassion, for giving the refugees time to rebuild their lives, but he was one voice against many. What if there was a place, he asked slowly, an idea forming even as he spoke. Not in town, but nearby, somewhere you could work and earn your keep and be left alone. She looked at him with such naked disbelief that it hurt. There is no such place. My family's farm, he said. It's about 3 miles from here, outside town proper. My father died 2 years ago and my mother followed 6 months later. My brother took over the main house and the fields, but there's a small cottage on the east side of the property where my grandmother used to live. It's been empty since she passed. The roof needs work and the place needs cleaning, but it's solid. Why would you offer this to me? Grishna asked, her tone suspicious. What do you want in return? Help with the farm work, Nathaniel said honestly. We're short-handed and if you're willing to work, you would earn your place. Room, board, and a small wage, nothing else. Just a chance to have that quiet place you dream about. She stared at him for so long he thought she would refuse outright. Then she asked, Your brother would allow this? I own part of the farm too, and the cottage is on my portion of the land. He might not like it, but he can't forbid it. Nathaniel stood and brushed the dirt from his pants. Think about it. If you want to see the place, I can take you there tomorrow. He walked away before she could respond, his heart pounding harder than it had any right to. He had not planned to make the offer, but now that the words were out, he found he meant them completely. The idea of Grishna having a safe place, seeing that guarded expression ease even a little, felt more right than anything had in a long time. That night, he could not sleep, wondering if she would take him up on it or if fear would keep her in the camp. When he arrived at their usual spot the next afternoon, she was already waiting, her few possessions bundled in a worn canvas pack. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. Show me this cottage, she said. They walked in silence through the early summer countryside, following the road north from the camp, and then cutting east along a path that wound through meadows filled with wildflowers. Nathaniel pointed out landmarks: the old oak that had been struck by lightning when he was a boy, the pond where he and his brother used to swim, the stone wall that marked the beginning of Edward's family land. Grishna took it all in with wide eyes, her shoulders gradually relaxing as they moved further from the camp and the town. The cottage sat at the edge of a small apple orchard, a stone structure with a thatched roof that did indeed need repair. Vines had grown up one wall, and the garden that Nathaniel's grandmother had tended was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers gone feral. But the bones of it were good, and when he pushed open the door, the inside was dry and structurally sound, just dusty and filled with the musty smell of disuse. Grishna stepped inside cautiously, her pack still clutched in her hands. The main room held a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves built into the walls. A doorway led to a small bedroom with a rope bed frame that would need a new mattress. The windows were intact, and when Nathaniel opened the shutters, light spilled in and illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. "It is real," she whispered, more to herself than to him. She set her pack down on the table and turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. "I did not think it would be real." "It needs work," Nathaniel said, "but if you are willing to help fix it up, it is yours to use for as long as you want." She looked at him then with an expression he could not quite read: hope warring with distrust, need fighting against the ingrained habit of expecting disappointment. "What if the townspeople find out? What if they come here angry? This is private land. They would be trespassing." He moved to the fireplace and checked the flue, finding it clear. "My brother Nathan—" "Your brother is also named Nathan," she interrupted. "No, sorry, Nicholas Edwards. We call him Nick. He runs the main farm operation. I help him, but I have my own projects too. He is not going to be happy about this, but he will not throw you out." That turned out to be optimistic. When Nathaniel walked back to the main farmhouse that evening, he found his brother in the barn, repairing a plow harness by lamplight. Nicholas was 3 years older, broader in the shoulders, and had their father's stern disposition. When Nathaniel explained what he had done, Nicholas set down his tools with deliberate care. "You brought an orc here, to our land, without talking to me first." "Yes," Nathaniel said, keeping his voice steady. "She is a refugee who needs help, and we need workers. It is practical." "It is reckless," Nicholas shot back. "The town barely tolerates that camp. If they find out we are housing one of them on our property, they could turn on us." "We have contracts with those people, Nathaniel. They buy our crops, our honey, our wool. You are risking our livelihood for some bleeding heart notion." "Or I am doing the right thing because it is the right thing," Nathaniel countered. "When did you become so afraid of what people think?" "When keeping this farm running became my responsibility," Nicholas said coldly. "You got to go play soldier for 6 years while I stayed here and worked myself to the bone keeping everything together. Don't lecture me about doing the right thing." The words stung because they held truth. Nathaniel had left, had chosen the army over the farm, and Nicholas had shouldered the burden alone. He took a breath and tried again. "I am not trying to make your life harder, but that girl has no one and nothing. If we cannot show some compassion after all the blood that has been spilled, what was the point of any of it?" Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he sighed. "She stays in the cottage, works for her keep, and keeps out of sight when we have buyers visiting. If there is any trouble, any at all, she goes." "Understood." "Understood," Nathaniel agreed, relief washing through him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just make sure this doesn't blow up in our faces." Over the following days, Nathaniel threw himself into making the cottage livable. He patched the roof with new thatch, replaced the rope on the bed frame, and hauled over a mattress from the main house's attic. He scrubbed the floors and windows while Grishna attacked the overgrown garden with a fierce determination that surprised him. She worked from dawn until dark, pulling weeds, turning soil, and identifying which plants were useful and which were invasive. She moved with an efficiency that spoke of experience, and when he commented on it, she explained that her clan had been farmers before the war, growing crops in the foothills of the Ironjaw Mountains. "We had apple trees too," she said one afternoon, looking up at the small orchards surrounding the cottage. "Older than these, gnarled and stubborn. They survived fires and droughts, gave fruit even in bad years. My father said they had spirits in them, watching over our family." "What happened to them?" Nathaniel asked, though he could guess. "Burned. Your army came through our valley and burned everything to deny us supplies. The trees, the crops, the storage houses. My father tried to fight them and died with an arrow in his throat. My mother and little brother starved that winter." Her voice was flat, reciting facts rather than reliving trauma, but her hands shook as she pulled at a stubborn root. "I was conscripted into a fighting unit. They said I would avenge my family. But I was just one more body they could throw at your soldiers." Nathaniel sat back on his heels, the trowel in his hand suddenly feeling obscenely ordinary. "I am sorry. That is inadequate, but I am sorry." "You did not burn my trees," she said. "You were just another soldier following orders like I was supposed to be, but I ran instead. I could not kill anymore. The clan elders declared me a coward and traitor. If any of my people found me, they would execute me for desertion." "So you are caught between two worlds," he said quietly. "Unable to go back, unwelcome to move forward." "Yes." She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw past the fear to the fierce intelligence underneath. "That is why this place, this cottage, it matters. For the first time since the war started, I might have somewhere I belong." He wanted to tell her that she did belong, that he would make sure of it, but the words seemed too large and presumptuous. Instead, he just nodded and went back to work, and they spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable silence. The cottage came together piece by piece. Nathaniel brought over a rocking chair from storage, and Grishna wept when she saw it, though she tried to hide her tears. He showed her how to work the pump outside that drew water from the well, and she showed him which wild herbs growing near the orchard were medicinal. She was an excellent cook, able to make hearty meals from the simplest ingredients, and she insisted on preparing dinner for him one evening as thanks for all his help. They ate at the small wooden table vegetable stew thick with wild onions and herbs, bread she had baked in the cottage small oven, and it was the most comfortable meal Nathaniel had eaten in months. "You are a better cook than anyone in my family," he said, sopping up the last of the stew with his bread. "My mother tried to teach me, but I never had the patience." "It is about paying attention," Grishna said. "Food tells you what it needs if you listen. Heat, time, seasoning. Everything has its proper balance." "Is that an orc saying?" She smiled slightly, a rare expression that softened her whole face. "No, that is a Grishna saying. My mother always said I was too philosophical for a farmer's daughter." "Philosophical farmers are the best kind," Nathaniel said. "My grandmother used to say that working the land teaches you about life. Patience, resilience, accepting what you cannot control. Wise woman. She was stubborn as a mule and sharp as a knife until the day she died at 93. He leaned back in his chair. "She would have liked you." Grishna looked startled. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because she believed in actions over words, and you are the hardest worker I have seen. And because she always said you could judge a person's character by how they treated the vulnerable. You have been kind to the children in the camp. I have seen you share your rations with the elderly orcs who have trouble getting to the distribution tent." She ducked her head, her green skin darkening in what he realized was a blush. "That is just being decent." "Exactly, and decency was the quality she valued most." They fell into an easy routine after that. Nathaniel would arrive at the cottage each morning after handling his early chores at the main farm, and he and Grishna would work together on whatever task needed doing. They repaired fences, tended the orchard, weeded the garden that was beginning to flourish under her care. She proved to have a gift with animals, coaxing the skittish barn cats to trust her and gentling the dairy cow Nicholas had assigned to Nathaniel's portion of the property. When he suggested getting chickens for the cottage, her eyes lit up with such pure joy that he went into town that very afternoon and returned with 6 laying hens and a rooster. Grishna built them a coop with surprising skill, fitting the boards together with precise joints and reinforcing the structure to keep out predators. When the chickens were settled in their new home, she stood with her arms crossed, watching them peck and scratch with an expression of deep satisfaction. "This is the first thing that is truly mine in a very long time," she said softly. "Thank you." "They are your chickens," Nathaniel agreed. "Which means you have to name them." She looked at him with mock severity. "Chickens do not need names." "These chickens do. It is a rule." "Whose rule?" "Mine. I just made it up." She laughed then, a real laugh that transformed her face and made her look her age for the first time since he had met her. "You are ridiculous. I have been called worse." He grinned at her. "So, what are their names?" She studied the chickens with exaggerated seriousness. "The brown one with the attitude is Helga. The white one is Snowdrop. The 2 rusty-colored ones are Ginger and Cinnamon. The black one is Midnight, and the little spotted one is Freckles." "Perfect. And the rooster?" "Alaric. He looks like an Alaric." "He does," Nathaniel agreed, though he had no idea what an Alaric was supposed to look like. "Very dignified." Summer settled over the land in earnest, bringing long days and warm nights. The orchard blossomed and then set fruit, promising a good harvest. Grishna's garden exploded with vegetables and herbs, and she began preserving the surplus in jars that lined the cottage shelves. The chickens laid eggs faithfully, and she traded the extras to Nicholas for supplies, a business arrangement that helped ease his brother's lingering concerns about her presence. She was, simply put, an asset to the farm, and even Nicholas had to admit it. But it was more than her work ethic that kept Nathaniel coming back to the cottage every day. It was the way she hummed while she cooked, tuneless little melodies that spoke of contentment. It was the sight of her in the garden at dawn, her face turned toward the sun with her eyes closed, soaking in the warmth. It was the conversations they had while working side by side, talks that ranged from the philosophical to the absurd, where she challenged his assumptions and he made her laugh. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, whether she had eaten enough, if she was lonely in the cottage at night. He was falling for her. He realized one afternoon while watching her chase a chicken that had escaped the coop. She was laughing, her braid flying behind her as she cornered Freckles against the garden fence, and the sight of her joy hit him like a physical blow. He loved her. Somewhere between the honeycomb and the chickens, between her quiet courage and her rare smiles, he had fallen completely in love with this orc woman who had only wanted a place to feel safe. The realization terrified him. Humans and orcs did not fall in love. It went against everything he had been taught, everything society deemed acceptable. He had fought in a war against her people, had killed orcs whose faces he could still remember in his nightmares. What right did he have to love her? What possible future could they have together? He tried to push the feelings down, to maintain a careful distance, but it was impossible. She had become too essential, too much a part of his daily life. And if he was honest with himself, he thought maybe she felt something too. He caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking, her expression soft and wondering. She found excuses to brush past him, to place her hand over his when reaching for the same tool. When they sat together in the evenings, talking as the sun set and fireflies emerged, the space between them seemed to hum with possibility. The moment of truth came unexpectedly, as such moments often do. They were repairing the cottage roof one afternoon, replacing some damaged thatch before the autumn rains began. Grishna was on the ladder, passing bundles of thatch up to Nathaniel, when her foot slipped. She yelped and fell backward, and without thinking, he lunged to catch her. They tumbled together off the low roof, landing in the soft grass with her on top of him. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, but he managed to keep his arms wrapped around her, cushioning her fall. For a moment they just lay there, stunned. Then Grishna pushed herself up on her elbows, looking down at him with wide eyes. She was close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her amber irises, could feel her breath against his face. "Are you hurt?" she asked urgently, her hands patting his shoulders and chest, checking for injuries. "I am fine," he managed, though his heart was hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the fall. "Are you?" "Yes, thank you, you caught me." They were still tangled together on the ground, neither of them moving to separate. Nathaniel's hand came up without conscious thought, cupping her cheek. Her skin was warm under his palm, slightly rough from sun and work. She leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed for just a moment, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "Grishna," he said, her name rough in his mouth, her eyes opened, meeting his. "I know." "You know what? Whatever you are about to say, I know." She looked frightened and hopeful and determined all at once. "I feel it too. This is complicated," he said, needing to be honest. "People will not understand. They will say terrible things. Let them say what they want." Her voice was fierce now, one hand coming up to cover his where it still rested against her face. I have survived a war, lost my family, been declared a traitor by my clan. I have learned that the opinions of people who do not know my heart do not matter. What matters is this. She pressed his hand more firmly against her cheek. What matters is that you gave me a place to feel safe, and somehow that turned into so much more. I love you, he said, the words spilling out before he could reconsider. I know I should not. I know all the reasons why it is impossible, but I love you anyway. She kissed him then, leaning down to press her lips to his with a gentleness that made his chest ache. Her tusks brushed against his skin, foreign and right all at once. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it held the promise of everything he had been afraid to want. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. I love you too. I think I have since the day you brought me honey and sat in the dirt just to make me feel less afraid. He sat up carefully, keeping her close, and kissed her again with more confidence. She made a small sound against his mouth, her fingers threading through his hair, and for a perfect moment, nothing else existed except the two of them and this impossible, precious thing blossoming between them. Reality, of course, was not so easily dismissed. When they finally pulled apart and straightened their clothes, the weight of what they were attempting settled over them. Nathaniel knew that they would face opposition, possibly violence, from both humans and orcs who saw their relationship as an abomination. But looking at Grishna, at the way she smiled at him now with her whole heart visible in her eyes, he knew he would face anything to keep her safe and by his side. We will figure it out, he said firmly. Together. Together, she echoed, taking his hand and squeezing it tightly. They finished the roof repair working side by side, but everything felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every casual touch was an affirmation, every shared glance a promise. When evening came and Nathaniel reluctantly said he should head back to the main house, Grishna walked him to the edge of the orchard, their fingers intertwined. "Will you tell your brother?" she asked. "Eventually. But let us have this for ourselves for a little while first." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I will be back tomorrow. You better be." He left her standing in the fading light, and as he walked home he felt lighter than he had in years. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. Yes, they would face prejudice and anger. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. Nicholas noticed the change in him immediately. At dinner that night, his brother studied him over the roast chicken and potatoes, eyes narrowed. "You are grinning like an idiot. What happened?" "Nothing," Nathaniel said far too quickly. "Right, nothing." Nicholas set down his fork. "This is about the orc girl, is it not?" Nathaniel's defensive instinct flared. "Her name is Grishna." "Fine, Grishna, you have feelings for her." It was not a question. There seemed little point in denying it. "Yes." Nicholas closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Nathaniel, please tell me you are not planning to actually pursue this." "I am not planning anything. It just happened. Things like this do not just happen. They are choices and they have consequences." Nicholas leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "I am not saying this to be cruel. I am saying it because I am your brother and I worry about you. If people in town find out, it could destroy us. And what kind of life can you build with her? Where would you live? How would you support a family? Have you thought about any of this? We just figured out how we feel about each other. We have not planned our entire future." Nathaniel's voice came out more defensive than he intended. "Can you not just be happy that I am happy for the first time in years?" Nicholas sighed heavily. "I want you to be happy. Of course I do. But I also want you to be realistic. This world is not kind to people who step outside what is considered normal. You fought in that war, Nathaniel. You know how humans feel about orcs. And I also know that hate does not end unless someone chooses to stop perpetuating it. Nathaniel stood, his appetite gone. Grishna is not the enemy. She never was. She is just a person who wants to live in peace, and I love her. I am sorry if that complicates your life, but I am not going to apologize for it. He left before Nicholas could respond, walking out into the cool night air. He did not go to his room in the main house. Instead, he found himself walking back toward the cottage, drawn by the glow of lamplight in the windows. Grishna answered his knock, surprise and concern crossing her face when she saw him. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I just needed to see you." He stepped inside and she closed the door behind him. "My brother knows. He is not happy about it. I imagine not." She guided him to the rocking chair and then sat at his feet, her hand on his knee. "Are you regretting this already?" "What? No." He covered her hand with his. "Grishna, no. I want to protect you from all the ugliness that is going to come our way, and I am angry that I have to. You deserve better than a world that will judge you for who you love." She looked up at him, her expression gentle. "We both deserve better. But we do not get to choose the world we live in, only how we live in it. And I choose to live in it with you, no matter what that means." He slid out of the chair and knelt beside her, framing her face with his hands. "You are braver than I am." "No, I am just tired of being afraid." She kissed him softly. "Stay tonight, just to sleep. I do not want to be alone, and I do not think you do either." He stayed. They lay together in her small bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her breath warm against his throat. He stroked her hair and listened to her breathing even out as she fell asleep, and he thought that this, right here, was worth fighting for. This peace, this contentment, this feeling of rightness that he had never experienced with anyone else. Morning came too soon. They woke tangled together, and for a moment Nathaniel forgot all the complications and just enjoyed the sight of Grishna's sleepy smile. Then reality reasserted itself, and he knew he needed to face the day and whatever consequences came from his conversation with Nicholas. His brother was already in the barn when Nathaniel arrived, mucking out stalls with aggressive efficiency. They worked in silence for a while before Nicholas finally spoke. "I thought about what you said last night." "And?" Nathaniel asked, pitching hay into the feed troughs. "And I still think you are making a mistake, but I also know you well enough to know that nothing I say will change your mind. So here is what we are going to do." Nicholas leaned on his pitchfork, meeting Nathaniel's eyes. "You keep this as quiet as possible. She stays on the cottage side of the property. When we have visitors, she makes herself scarce. And if, God forbid, this actually turns into something permanent, we deal with that when it comes." It was not enthusiastic support, but it was not outright opposition either. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. If this blows up in our faces, I reserve the right to say I told you so." "Fair enough." Over the following weeks, Nathaniel and Grishna settled into their new reality. They were careful, discreet, aware that discovery could bring trouble. But within the boundaries of the cottage and orchard, they built a life together. They worked side by side during the day and spent evenings cooking dinner, talking, sharing the mundane intimacies of a domestic life. Grishna taught him words in the Orcish language, and he taught her to read and write in common, which she had never learned. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patient exploration, and afterward they would lie tangled together, talking about everything and nothing. Nathaniel had never been happier. The shadows of his war experience seemed less oppressive when she was near. She understood nightmares and trauma in a way most people could not. And on the nights when he woke gasping from dreams of blood and death, she held him and did not make him explain. In turn, He provided the safety she had craved for so long, a place where she could be vulnerable without fear of it being used against her. The first real test of their relationship came in late summer, when a delegation from the remaining orc clans came through the region, heading to the capital for treaty negotiations. Word spread through the countryside, and tensions rose as old prejudices surfaced. The town council held an emergency meeting to discuss security measures, and Nathaniel attended to make sure no one suggested rounding up the refugees or doing anything else idiotic. The meeting was as bad as he feared. Proposals ranged from instituting a curfew for the camp to demanding that all orcs wear identifying markers when they came into town. Nathaniel argued against every discriminatory measure, earning himself hostile looks from his neighbors, but he was not the only voice of reason, and eventually, cooler heads prevailed. The council settled on simply increasing the town watch during the delegation's passage, a compromise that accomplished nothing but made the fearful feel better. What worried him was the whisper he heard as he left the meeting. Two men he knew from childhood, farmers like him, were talking in low voices near the door. "I heard Edwards is harboring one of them on his property." The younger brother, the one who was always a bit soft, that is the one, got himself an orc woman in that old cottage. Unnatural, if you ask me. Nathaniel's blood ran cold, but he forced himself to keep walking, not to react. If they knew, others would soon know too. He went straight to Nicholas, finding him in the equipment shed. "People are talking," he said without preamble. "About Grishna." Nicholas cursed softly. "How bad?" "Bad enough. I do not know how they found out, but word is spreading. Then we need to prepare for trouble." Nicholas set down the harness he had been oiling. "I will talk to the workers, make sure they understand that she is under our protection, and anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere. You need to talk to her, make sure she understands she needs to be extra careful." Nathaniel nodded and headed straight for the cottage. He found Grishna hanging laundry in the orchard, the chickens pecking around her feet. She took one look at his face and went pale. "What happened?" He told her everything. She listened silently, her hands clenching in the wet shirt she was holding. When he finished, she sat down heavily on the grass. "I should leave," she said quietly, "before I bring trouble down on you and your brother." "No," he knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You are not leaving. This is your home. Nathaniel, you could lose everything because of me. The farm, your reputation, maybe even your safety. And I could lose you, which would be worse than all of that combined." He squeezed her hands. "I am not letting fear drive you away. We knew this would not be easy. We just have to be strong." "I am tired of being strong," she whispered, and he saw tears tracking down her green cheeks. "I am tired of fighting for the right to simply exist. I know. I am so sorry." He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his shoulder. "But you do not have to fight alone anymore. I am here. Nicholas is here. We will get through this together." She clung to him, her body shaking with sobs that spoke of years of accumulated pain and fear. He just held her, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances until the storm of emotion passed. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but determined. "All right," she said. "We face it together." The trouble came 3 days later. Nathaniel was in the north field with Nicholas when they saw smoke rising from the direction of the cottage. They ran, hearts pounding, and arrived to find a group of 5 men from town standing in the orchard. They had not set fire to anything yet, but one of them held a torch, and the threat was clear. Grishna stood on the cottage porch, a pitchfork held defensively in front of her. "That is far enough," Nicholas said, his voice hard and authoritative. "You are trespassing on private property." "We are concerned citizens," the man with the torch said. Nathaniel recognized him as Gerald Fletcher, a blacksmith with a mean streak. "We heard you are keeping an orc here. That is a danger to the whole community." "She is a farm worker who has done nothing wrong," Nathaniel said, moving to stand between the men and Grishna. "And like my brother said, you are trespassing. Leave, now." "Or what?" Gerald sneered. "You going to defend your pet orc against your own people? She is not a pet, she is a person. And yes, I will defend her." Nathaniel's hand went to the knife at his belt. It was a work tool, not a weapon, but the gesture was clear. "Nathaniel Edwards, you have lost your mind," another man said, shaking his head. "Lying with an orc, it is unnatural, wrong. Your parents would be ashamed." "My parents taught me to judge people by their actions, not their race. Grishna has worked hard, caused no problems, and bothered no one. The only people disturbing the peace here are you lot." Nathaniel's voice was ice. "Now leave before I fetch the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing and making threats." The men looked at each other, clearly not having expected this level of resistance. The torch wavered in Gerald's hand. "The whole town is going to know about this. You will be outcasts." "Then we will be outcasts," Nicholas said, surprising Nathaniel. His brother came to stand beside him, presenting a united front. "But we will be outcasts who do not bow to mob justice. Get off our land." For a tense moment it could have gone either way. Then Gerald spat on the ground and turned away. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Nicholas said. "Touch anything on this property, threaten anyone here again, and I will personally make sure you regret it. Now leave." The men retreated, muttering among themselves. Nathaniel and Nicholas watched them go, not relaxing until they were well out of sight. Only then did Nathaniel turn to Grishna, who had lowered the pitchfork but still looked ready to bolt. "Are you all right?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to reach her. "I am fine. I was just—" She swallowed hard. "I was just getting ready to run again, like I always do. You do not have to run anymore." He took the pitchfork from her shaking hands and pulled her into his arms. "I meant what I said. I will protect you." Nicholas cleared his throat. "We need to be smarter about this. No more pretending she is just a hired hand. If people are going to talk anyway, we might as well be honest about it." "Honest about what, exactly?" Nathaniel asked. Nicholas looked between them, then sighed. "About the fact that you two are together, really together, because that is what this is, right? Not just kindness or charity or whatever we have been calling it." "Yes," Nathaniel said, meeting his brother's eyes. "I love her, we are together." "Then make it official," Nicholas said. "Marry her." Grishna gasped softly, and Nathaniel felt his heart skip. "What? Marry her," Nicholas repeated. "If you two are serious about this, and clearly you are, then make it legitimate in the eyes of the law. It is harder for people to attack a married couple on their own property. It gives you legal protections. And honestly, if you are going to scandalize the whole town anyway, you might as well go all the way. That is." Nathaniel looked at Grishna, who looked utterly stunned. "That is not how I imagined this conversation going." "Is your brother suggesting what I think he is suggesting?" Grishna asked faintly. "I think he is." Nathaniel took her hand. "And honestly, it is not the worst idea. Grishna, I was going to wait to give us more time, but screw waiting. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" She stared at him, then at Nicholas, then back at him. "You want to marry me, an orc, knowing what that will mean." "I want to marry you because you are you. The orc part is just one aspect of who you are, and honestly, I find your tusks incredibly attractive, so yes." He grinned at her, trying to lighten the moment. "Is that a yes?" "You are insane," she said, but she was smiling now, tears spilling over again. "You are both completely insane, and yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her right there on the porch, with Nicholas pointedly looking away and making disgusted noises. When they broke apart, Grishna was laughing and crying at the same time, and Nathaniel felt like he could conquer the world. The logistics proved complicated. Most churches would not perform a marriage between a human and an orc, and the town clerk refused outright to file the paperwork. But Nicholas knew a retired priest who lived a day's journey away, a man who had advocated for peace during the war and believed in compassion over doctrine. Father Benedict was elderly, nearly blind, and utterly unbothered by social conventions. "If you two love each other and want to pledge yourselves in the eyes of the gods, who am I to refuse?" he said when they arrived at his small cottage. Come in, come in. We will do this properly." The ceremony was simple, held in Father Benedict's garden under the open sky. Nicholas served as witness, and the priest's housekeeper stood in as the second required witness. Father Benedict spoke about love transcending boundaries, about choosing compassion over fear, about building bridges instead of walls. Nathaniel held Grishna's hands and made his vows with a full heart, promising to stand by her in joy and sorrow, to protect and cherish her, to build a life together no matter what obstacles they faced. Grishna's voice shook as she made her vows in return, speaking first in common and then repeating them in her native Orcish tongue. The words were guttural and beautiful, and though Nathaniel did not understand most of them, he understood the weight of what she was promising. When Father Benedict pronounced them married, Nathaniel kissed his wife, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, this impossible perfect moment. They returned to the farm as husband and wife, and if the town disapproved, they kept it at a distance. Some of the farmhands quit, unwilling to work alongside an orc, but others stayed, either out of loyalty to the Edwards family or genuine acceptance. Nicholas hired workers from the refugee camp to replace those who left, and gradually the farm took on a new character, a place where humans and orcs worked side by side. Grishna bloomed in her new role. She was no longer just a refugee hiding in a cottage, but a full partner in the farm's operation. She managed the orchard with expert skill, improving the yield beyond what they had achieved in years. She started a side business selling her preserved foods and herbal remedies, and people who might not accept her socially had no problem buying her products. Money was money, after all, and her goods were genuinely superior. Nathaniel moved his belongings into the cottage, making it their shared home. They expanded the garden, added more chickens, and got the goat that Grishna had dreamed about. She named it Clover and spoiled it shamelessly. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the orchard, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and talk about their plans for the future. "I want to expand the garden," she said one night. "Make it big enough to supply not just us but to sell at market. Really establish it as a business." "I think that is a great idea," Nathaniel said. "You have a gift for growing things. And I was thinking." She hesitated, then continued. "Maybe eventually we could offer work to other refugees, ones who want to integrate but have nowhere to go. Not many, just a few, build something bigger than just us. A sanctuary," Nathaniel said slowly, "a place where people can prove that different groups can coexist peacefully." "Yes, exactly that." She looked up at him, her amber eyes bright. "Is that foolish?" "No, it is visionary." He kissed her forehead. "And we will do it. Together." The first winter of their marriage was harsh, testing the cottage's repairs and their resources, but they weathered it together, literally and figuratively. They insulated the walls with straw and mud, kept the fire burning day and night, and spent long evenings curled together under blankets, telling each other stories from their childhoods. Nathaniel learned about Orcish customs and traditions, about the festivals and rituals that Grishna had grown up with. She learned about human holidays, and though she was skeptical of some of them, agreed to celebrate them with him. The winter solstice was particularly special. They decorated the cottage with evergreen branches and holly, and Grishna made a feast that combined orcish and human dishes in surprising harmony. They exchanged gifts. He gave her a new set of gardening tools he had commissioned from a blacksmith 2 towns over, and she gave him a quilt she had sewn in secret, embroidered with scenes from their life together. He cried when he saw it, overwhelmed by the love and work it represented. "I have never had anyone make something like this for me," he said, running his fingers over the careful stitching. "Well, now you do." She smiled and pulled him close. "You have me and I have you, and that is all we need." Spring came eventually, as it always does, bringing with it new life and new challenges. The refugee camp began to disperse as people either integrated into local communities or moved on to other regions. Some chose to stay near Millbrook, and several approached Nathaniel and Grishna about working at their farm. They hired 3 at first: a young male orc named Toruk, who was skilled with animals, an older female named Breshka who knew masonry, and a human woman named Alara Fletcher who had been ostracized by her family for speaking out against the mob mentality. Together, they expanded the farm's operations. Toruk built a proper stable and helped Nicholas with the horses. Breshka repaired and improved the farm's infrastructure, building stone walls and a better barn. Alara worked with Grishna on the expanded garden, and the 2 women became close friends. It was the beginning of something new, a community built on mutual respect and hard work rather than shared species or background. Not everyone approved. There were still incidents: vandalism, threatening letters, the occasional confrontation in town. But for every person who spoke out against them, another offered quiet support. The baker who sold them bread at a discount. The seamstress who made Grishna a dress for the harvest festival and would not accept payment. The sheriff who made it clear he would not tolerate violence against anyone in his jurisdiction, orc or human. Change came slowly, but it came. The Edwards farm became known as a place where the barriers between species did not matter, where what counted was your willingness to work and contribute. It was not perfect, and there were setbacks and difficulties, but the foundation was strong. 2 years after their marriage, Grishna came to Nathaniel with news that made his heart stop. She was pregnant. He stared at her, his mind trying to process the information, and then whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed and scolded him to be careful. "We are going to have a baby," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby." "Yes, we are going to have a baby," she confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Are you ready for this?" "Absolutely not, but we will figure it out." He kissed her deeply. "We always do." The pregnancy was not easy. There were complications, fears about whether a half-human, half-orc child could even survive, worries about how the community would react. But Grishna was strong, and with the support of a midwife from the orc community who had experience with mixed births, they navigated the challenges. Nathaniel was beside himself with worry the entire time, hovering over her and driving her crazy with his concern. "I am not made of glass," she told him firmly when he tried to stop her from weeding the garden in her 7th month. "I am an orc. We are tougher than you humans give us credit for." "I know you are tough. I just want you to be safe. Then trust me to know my own limits." She softened, touching his cheek. "I appreciate that you worry, but I need to keep living my life, not sit around being fragile." He backed off, though it killed him, and watched as she continued to work and plan and build their future. She was magnificent, her strength and determination shining through even when she was tired and uncomfortable. And when the time came, when the midwife said the baby was coming, he held her hand and talked her through the pain, and felt utterly useless in the face of what she was enduring. The birth took hours. Long, agonizing hours where Nathaniel thought he might lose both of them. But Grishna was a fighter, and finally, the baby's cry filled the cottage. The midwife cleaned and wrapped the infant and placed the baby in Grishna's arms, and Nathaniel looked down at his child for the first time. Their daughter was perfect. She had her mother's green skin, though lighter in tone, and her father's brown eyes. Her ears were pointed but smaller than full orc ears, and she had tiny nubs where tusks would eventually grow. She was beautiful and impossible and absolutely real. "Hello, little one," Grishna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name her?" Nathaniel asked, his own eyes wet as he stroked one finger down his daughter's impossibly soft cheek. "I was thinking." "Mara," Grishna said. "It means hope in Orcish." "Mara Edwards," Nathaniel said, trying it out. "It is perfect. She is perfect." They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, a family against all odds. Nicholas came to visit the next day and was surprisingly emotional when he held his niece. "She looks like you," he told Nathaniel. "Around the eyes. And like her mother everywhere else," Nathaniel said proudly. Word spread quickly about the baby. Some reacted with disgust, calling her an abomination. But others came bearing gifts, blankets, and toys, and offers of help. The community that had formed around the farm rallied around the new family, and Nathaniel realized they had built something even more important than he had thought. They had proven that different peoples could not just coexist but blend, create something new and beautiful together. Mara grew quickly, strong and curious and fearless. She toddled after the chickens, tried to help in the garden before she could properly walk, and laughed at everything. Grishna was a devoted mother, patient and loving, teaching their daughter words in both Common and Orcish. Nathaniel spent hours playing with Mara, making her giggle with silly faces and stories. Life was not without its challenges. There were still prejudices to face, still people who refused to accept what they had built. But standing on the cottage porch one autumn evening, watching Grishna chase their daughter through the orchard while the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathaniel knew they had won the important battle. Grishna had wanted a place where she felt safe. They had built that and so much more. They had built a home, a family, a community. They had built a future where their daughter would grow up knowing both sides of her heritage, where she would be loved for exactly who she was. "What are you thinking about?" Grishna asked, coming to stand beside him with Mara on her hip. Their daughter was nearly asleep, her head on her mother's shoulder. "I was thinking about that day at the camp when I asked you what you dreamed about," Nathaniel said, wrapping his arm around both of them. "And you said you wanted a place where you felt safe." "I remember," she said softly. "And you gave me that, this cottage, this farm, this life. You gave me everything I dreamed of and more." "We gave it to each other," he corrected. "Your courage, your strength, your willingness to try even when you were terrified. That is what built this." She leaned into him, and they stood together in the gathering dark, holding their daughter and each other. The stars began to emerge overhead, bright and steady, and somewhere in the orchard, an owl called out its evening song. "I am safe here," Grishna whispered. "Finally, completely safe." "Always," Nathaniel promised. "I will always keep you safe." And he meant it with every fiber of his being. They had faced down war and prejudice, fear and hatred, and come out the other side stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be challenges, they would face them together, as they had faced everything else. The cottage light glowed warm and welcoming behind them as they went inside to put Mara to bed. This small house that had once been empty and forgotten was now the heart of a new beginning, proof that love could bridge any divide, that hope could take root even in the most unlikely soil. As Nathaniel tucked his daughter into her crib and kissed his wife goodnight, he thought about how far they had come. From that first tentative conversation at a refugee camp, through all the struggles and triumphs, to this moment of perfect domestic peace. They had built their dream one day at a time, one act of courage and compassion at a time. The future was uncertain, as futures always are. But standing in the cottage that night, surrounded by love and possibility, Nathaniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the orchard trees, carrying with it the promise of harvest and the hope of spring beyond the coming winter. Inside, a family slept peacefully, safe and loved and home at last. It was everything Grishna had dreamed of, and everything Nathaniel had never known he needed. It was, quite simply enough, years would pass. Mara would grow strong and bright, eventually becoming a bridge between communities herself. The farm would prosper, expanding its reputation as a place of acceptance and hard work. More mixed families would come, seeking the sanctuary the Edwards had created, and the community would grow. Prejudice would not disappear overnight, but it would fade, generation by generation, as children like Mara proved that the divisions humans and orcs had maintained were artificial and unnecessary. Nicholas would eventually marry Alara Fletcher, the human woman who had been cast out by her own family, and they would have children who grew up alongside Mara, cousins in everything but blood who played together in the orchard, and learned that family was defined by love, not species. The farm would pass down through the generations, always maintaining its founding principle, that everyone deserved a place where they felt safe. But on that autumn night, as the Edwards family slept in their cottage, none of that was known yet. There was only the present moment, imperfect, precious, hard-won. A place where an orc woman who had lost everything had finally found a home. A place where a human man who had carried the weight of war had found peace. A place where their daughter would grow up knowing she was loved exactly as she was. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The dream Grishna had whispered about in a muddy refugee camp had become reality not through magic or divine intervention, but through courage, love, and the willingness to build something new from the broken pieces of the old world. And as she slept that night with her husband's arm around her and their daughter breathing softly in the next room, Grishna smiled in her sleep, finally, completely, utterly safe. The story of Nathaniel and Grishna would become legend in the years to come, told and retold as an example of what was possible when people chose love over fear, compassion over prejudice. But they were not legends that night. They were just a family, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, living their lives and building their future one day at a time. And that, in the end, was the most remarkable thing of all. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the simple, stubborn persistence of love in a world that had tried to tell them it was impossible. They had proven the world wrong, and in doing so, had helped change it. The cottage stood solid in the darkness, a beacon of light and warmth in a world still learning to heal from war. Inside, a family slept peacefully, dreaming their dreams and building their tomorrow. Outside, the orchard whispered its secrets to the wind, and the chickens roosted safely in their coop, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Everything was as it should be. Everything was right. Everything was home. And in the morning, they would wake and begin again, tending their garden and their animals, working side by side, building the life they had chosen together. There would be laughter and hard work, small joys and minor frustrations, the beautiful mundane reality of a life well lived. Grishna had asked for a place where she felt safe. Nathaniel had given her that and received the same in return. Together, they had created not just a home but a haven, not just a family but a future. And though neither of them could have imagined it on that rainy day at the refugee camp, they had found everything they needed in each other. The dream had become real. The impossible had become everyday. And love, stubborn and strong and true, had won.